Catholic pilgrims, as we learn from one of Spain's most revered saints, Saint Teresa of Avila, a spirited doctor of the Church. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week as we read from Saint Teresa's book, The Interior Castle. Oh, it's time, Catholic pilgrims, to stimulate our minds and souls, so welcome back to the 57th episode. Almost every year, I religiously watch The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. I think I'm saying his name right. Is it Carlton or Charlton? I think it's Charlton. Somebody correct me. I started watching it as a kid with my dad around Easter time, and it has become a tradition in my family. I love to quote it. In fact, I pretty much have it memorized. My dad and I love how much they say bitter bondage all the time and tally of bricks. I've watched it so many times that I now notice the tiniest things in the movie, things that you wouldn't normally notice. There's one part in the movie when Moses is living as a shepherd after he's been cast out of Egypt, and he's sitting by the Forbidden Mountain, having just rescued Joshua from dehydration. As he's sitting there talking to his wife and Joshua, Moses stops and says, "Do you see that strange fire?" And Joshua says, "A bush that burns?" And Moses is looking right up at it. It totally grabbed his attention, causing him to stop talking mid-sentence. But what is so funny is that from that scene, you think that the bush is burning not that far away or not that high up the mountain. But once Moses goes up to discover it, he is like winding through the mountain, and then the bush is tucked back in a cave where no one would have been able to notice it from the ground. And so every year my family laughs about this mistake in the filming. Oh, I do love that movie. Now, I realize that the movie doesn't follow the Bible perfectly. It takes some liberties in order to make a more full story. But there are some aspects of it that I want to talk about on the other side of our readings from St. Teresa. So we'll be reading from the Sixth Mansion, Chapter 3, Numbers 11 through 15. But first, a word from our sponsor, Chrism Press. Get ready to visit Federalist Boston with the Molly Chase series by Rhonda Ortiz, starting with In Pieces. Meet Molly, a beautiful and artistic young woman struggling to keep her sanity after her father's suicide. Follow her journey as she navigates a world of gossip and scandal and discovers the true meaning of love and sacrifice. Winner of the 2020 ACFW Genesis Award for Historical Romance, this novel is a must-read for fans of historical fiction. Go to chrismpress.com to purchase your copy. And of course, if you use the coupon code Pilgrim15, you will receive 15% off your first order. All right, let's hear from St. Teresa. The third proof is that these words do not pass from the memory, but remain there for a very long time. Sometimes they are never forgotten. This is not the case with what men may utter, which, however grave and learned they may be, is not thus impressed on our memory. Neither, if they prophesy of things to come, do we believe them as we do these divine locutions, which leave us so convinced of their truth that, although their fulfillment sometimes seems utterly impossible, and we vacillate and doubt about them, there still remains in the soul a certainty of their verity which cannot be destroyed. Perhaps everything may seem to militate against what was heard, and years pass by, yet the Spirit never loses its belief that God will make use of means unknown to men for the purpose, and that finally what was foretold must surely happen, as indeed it does. Still, as I said, the soul is troubled at seeing many obstacles in the way of the accomplishment of the prophecy. The words, their effects, and the assurance they carry with them convince the soul at the moment that they came from God. Afterwards, however, doubts arise as to whether the locutions came from the devil or from the imagination, although while hearing them, the person would have died to to defend their truth. But as I said, these misgivings must be suggested by the evil one to afflict and intimidate her, especially if by carrying out a command thus given, great good will result to souls, and some work be done conducing notably to the honor and service of God, concerning which great difficulties have to be overcome. In such cases, where will Satan stop short? At least, he weakens faith, and it is a terrible evil to doubt that God has power to work in a way far beyond our understanding. Despite all these difficulties, and although the confessors consulted on these matters say the words were but fancies, while events take such an unfavorable turn as to make the realization of these predictions seem impossible, yet there remains so lively a spark of certainty in the mind, I know not whence it comes, that although all other hopes die out, it cannot, if it would, quench this ardent spark of confidence. At last, as I said, our Lord's words are accomplished, at which the soul is so satisfied and joyful that it could do nothing but praise His majesty, more because it sees His words prove true than on account of the thing itself, even though it may be of consequence to the person concerned. I know not why the soul attaches such importance to these communications being verified. I think that if the person herself were detached in telling falsehoods, she would not be so grieved as at these locutions proving untrue, as if she could do anything in the matter beyond repeating what has been said to her. A certain person was frequently reminded in such a case of the prophet Jonah, when he found that Nineveh was not to be destroyed. In fact, as these words come from the Spirit of God, it is right thus to trust them, and to desire that He who is supreme truth should not be thought a deceiver. Justly, therefore, does their hearer rejoice when, after 1,000 delays and enormous difficulties, they are accomplished. Although this success may entail great suffering on herself, she prefers it to the non-fulfillment of what she knows our Lord most certainly foretold. Possibly everyone is not so weak as this, if indeed it is a weakness, though I cannot myself condemn it as an evil. We know from the Bible that Moses heard the voice of God speaking to him. Moses has a deep conversation with God about his mission, which is to free the Hebrew people from the bitter bondage of slavery. Sorry, but I had to use the quote. God, through an angel in the form of a burning bush, speaks to Moses. Now, we read in the first part of our reading that the third proof that locutions are from God is that, quote, these words do not pass from the memory, but remain there for a very long time. Sometimes they are never forgotten, unquote. Moses has been credited, to my knowledge, by most scholars as having written the book of Exodus, and so Moses wrote down all these things that God told him, which is pretty incredible. There are things that I wish I could remember, conversations with loved ones that I wish I could recall in full, but I simply can't. Time has faded the conversation to where I can just recall the gist of the conversation. But I think that when God speaks to you and relays important information, of course it will always be important, you fully remember. Something interesting happens, though, when Moses is up on the mountain receiving his commission. He questions God and asks if he is really the man for the job. He's having this truly holy moment with God, hearing his words, and yet he's worrying about things. Moses asks, what if people don't believe me or listen to me? He tells God that I've never been eloquent and I'm slow of speech and tongue. He sees all these obstacles, and yet God assures him that he's going to make it happen. St. Teresa says, quote, still, as I said, the soul is troubled at seeing many obstacles in the way of the accomplishment of the prophecy. The words, their effects, and the assurance they carry with them convince the soul at the moment that they came from God, unquote. She continues, quote, that the evil one will cause these afflictions and intimidate, especially if by carrying out a command thus, giving great good will result to souls, and some work be done conducing notably to the honor and service of God, unquote. There are times where we may hear God give us a mission and tell us that he needs us to do something for him, and we are excited at first. But then our humanness gets in the way and we start to worry and doubt. The devil may tempt us into thinking that whatever we've been asked to do is impossible and there are just too many obstacles. We must ignore all this and trust. Trust that God will see us through. In the movie, there's one character that just absolutely drives me nuts. It's Dathan. Dathan is a Hebrew, but he's a kiss-up to the Egyptians because he isn't a godly man, and he thinks that the Egyptians will give him power and wealth, and they do for a time. So throughout the movie, especially once the Hebrews are let go, he's constantly trying to dissuade the Hebrews from following Moses. And everyone can clearly see that God is on Moses' side and is leading him, and that Moses has very close communication with God. Yet Dathan is like the guy with the rain cloud consistently over his head. At the Red Sea, he's trying to get the Hebrews to turn around and go back, but they make it through. While camping at the foot of Mount Sinai, he tries to get the people to abandon the one true God and worship a golden calf because Moses is taking too long, but then Moses shows up with the Ten Commandments. Moses, by this time, has fully surrendered to God, and he knows that, quote, these words come from the Spirit of God, and it is right thus to trust them and to desire that he who is supreme truth should not be thought a deceiver, unquote. And so thankfully, quote, after 1,000 delays and enormous difficulties, they, the words of prophecy, are accomplished, unquote. As we know, Moses eventually got the people to the edge of the promised land. He didn't get to go in himself, but after years of toil and hardship, he got them there, and Joshua took them the rest of the way. As St. Teresa says, quote, although this success may entail great suffering on herself, she prefers it to the non-fulfillment of what she knows our Lord must certainly have foretold, unquote. Moses did suffer, but I think he preferred the suffering as opposed to him not fulfilling what God had called him to do. Something for us all to think about. Many times when God speaks to us and asks us to do something for him, it can seem impossible and daunting. We see all the obstacles and start to doubt. But if we are sure of God's words, we can trust that he would never call us to something that he wouldn't help us to fulfill. We can trust that he will see us through. So that is all for today, Catholic pilgrims. Remember, God's locutions will carry authority, bring peace, create a calmness and devotion in your life, and they will be words that you will always remember. Have a blessed rest of your day. Until we meet again, live the faith boldly and travel well.